What is going on, guys? Mike here, and today we're talking about one of the most heavily debated topics I've seen over the past couple of years, and that is the ascension of Kawhi Leonard. Now, even the casual fans of the NBA acknowledge his dominance on the defensive side of the ball, but on offense, a lot of people have labeled him a system player, basically inferring that he's only successful because of the Spurs system, and that if guys like, say, Paul George were on the Spurs, that they would be just as successful. Now, before I get into the analysis, I just want to say that every player is to some extent a product of their system, but I want to take a look at exactly how much of Kawhi's offensive success can be attributed to the Spurs, and would he be just as successful on most NBA teams. So first, let's take a look at Kawhi's increased role on offense over the last 2 years. Here's a shot chart from 2014-2015 where you see Kawhi Leonard at second. Tim Duncan and Tony Parker still have significant roles, but we see that's about to change. This past year, Kawhi Leonard took the most shots on the Spurs along with LaMarcus Aldridge. His usage rate went up almost 3%, and you see Tony Parker and Tim Duncan taking a backseat to guys like Kawhi Leonard and LaMarcus Aldridge. Now let's look at how he's being used in this increased role on offense. So he's being used most frequently in spot-up situations and pretty evenly distributed everywhere else across the board. But I want to look specifically at isolation situations because more so than anything else, that will tell us how he operates independent of the Spurs system. So first, let's look at frequency, right? How often is he isolating? And Kawhi ranks 26th in the league in frequency of isolation plays, and you look at the guys that are around him in this category, guys like John Wall, Chris Middleton, Dwayne Wade, Stephen Curry. These are not guys that we talk as if they are system players. These are guys that we talk about as leaders on their team, guys whose team relies on them and not vice versa. And for further context, let's look at the Spurs offense. The Spurs isolate the second least frequently in the league. And when you see a player who has high frequency isolation on a low frequency isolation team, that tells you how reliant upon that player they are in isolation and bailout type situations. And this is a great stat that comes courtesy of Nick Sciria. Nick is a great follow on Twitter. You guys should definitely follow him if you don't already. But it just shows Kawhi's efficiency in terms of points per possession in different situations and where that ranks in the league. And as you see, he's 7th most efficient in isolation situations. So when you see a high frequency player who's also efficient, that is a telling sign about how good he is in those situations. But the caveat is that not all isolation situations are created equal. So let's look at where Kawhi's isolations are coming from. Here you see a typical situation where he's caught late in the shot clock with the ball in his hands, forced to bail the offense out after the set play has failed. Here there's no action on offense other than to get Kawhi the ball on the baseline, and he simply has to go to work on a post-up against Klay Thompson. Another situation where Kawhi was a last resort and not the first option on offense. Here's another set play, they try to run a spread pick and roll, it doesn't work out, and Kawhi's forced to go to work on a great defender like Thabo Sefolosha. You're going to see a similar situation here on this next play where the pick and roll fails again. Tony Parker has to back it back out, and the ball always seems to find its way to Kawhi's hands late in the shot clock. And he's forced to settle for bad jump shots. He's forced to settle for long twos, and what I've found oftentimes is that Kawhi is settling for these long twos as opposed to looking to go to the basket or even passing the ball around the perimeter, seeking to get a better shot for a teammate. He's very, very content with settling for these long jump shots, even when there's a defender in his face, and even though you're seeing he's making these shots, these are not the first priority. And the stats back this pattern up. According to basketballreference.com, this is the list of players who take the most field goal attempts from long two range, right? So from 16 to 22 feet. So Kawhi ranks 36th at just over 3 a game, and 58.2% of them are assisted. So when you sort based on percent assisted, a really interesting pattern shows up, and it kind of sorts the players based on how often they isolate. So when you look at the guys near the top of the list, and again, you see Kawhi ranks at 20th there, but when you look at the guys near the top, guys like LaMarcus Aldridge or JJ Redick, those are guys who are products of their offense, guys who are intentionally put in situations where they should be taking, coming around screens or being kicked out on a drive. And the guys that are near Kawhi are guys like Andrew Wiggins, Dion Waiters, Kevin Durant, guys who are relied upon to take those isolation shots, oftentimes late in the shot clock or in bailout situations. And for further context here, the Spurs rank 6th in the NBA in percent of 2-point field goals assisted, which just shows again that they're not often put in situations where they need to isolate, but when they do, they rely on Kawhi Leonard. So here are the top 10 players in the league in points per possession in isolation situations. So Kawhi ranks 7th, but what I incorporated here was my research I did on long 2 attempts. And what's interesting here is that you see Kawhi Leonard has a low amount of possessions relative to his long 2 attempts per game. Now, not all long 2s are isolation situations, so what I did was I calculated the unassisted long 2s per isolation situations. And what you notice is that Kawhi takes more unassisted long 2s per isolation situations than everyone that's more efficient than him except for Jamal Crawford. Now, I'm showing you these statistics for 2 reasons. A, to show you that the Spurs aren't simply putting him in very convenient isolation situations where he's getting layups or dunks, and B, to show you that he's great despite the fact that he's taking very inefficient shots on a regular basis. So let's look briefly at some situations where Kawhi has more success in isolation. Here you see he catches Andre Roberson out of his defensive stance and immediately goes after him, and this is what makes Kawhi so great. Kawhi has some of the best instincts in the game of basketball, and as we all know, basketball is all about instincts. Watch in this next clip how he does a great job of reading the defense. As soon as Brandon Rush takes a bad gamble, he sees the defense is slow to recover and immediately goes after them. Now, he doesn't get the call here, but this is the type of instinct that we're talking about when we see Kawhi Leonard as an elite isolation player. What also makes him so great is his blend of length, size, and quickness. There are few players in the NBA who can match him on all 3 of those categories, which is what makes me so upset when he finds himself in so many situations where he's taking long 2s that are often contested. In these past 2 plays, you saw him blow by defenders who are either slower or much smaller than him. In that case, you saw him blow by Dante Cunningham. There's no way he can keep up with him. And then in this case, he takes a great defender like Andre Roberson and is able to turn the corner and attract another defender and dish it to Duncan for an easy bucket. Here he takes Reggie Jackson off the dribble, just simply backs him down into the post, and this is what I want to see more from Kawhi. This is where he really thrives, taking smaller defenders down into the post or blowing by bigger defenders in face-up or at the top of the key dribble situations. Now let's depart briefly from his isolation and look at what makes him so great, and that is his basketball IQ. There you saw him blow by Jabari Parker out of his stance, and here he catches Tony Allen sleeping and is able to seep into open creases in the defense. Kawhi Leonard is one of the most intelligent players in all of basketball, and you notice that you simply can't fall asleep when you defend him. Here he catches Vince Carter and cuts for an easy layup, and I love this play where the Spurs start to flow into motion strong, and then he catches Tayshaun Prince cheating and cuts backdoor for an easy layup. That is a great read from an unbelievably intelligent basketball player. Here again against the Thunder, you see him cut to a spot when there's no defender on him and get a nice post up against Andre Roberson for the bucket. And this last play is a great example of his versatility and is something I'd really like to see more from him in isolation situations. Here he tries to ISO on Kevin Durant, but he doesn't force up the shot when it's not there. He kicks it back out and gets a spot up 3. And the fact that he can not only create his own shot but also be on the receiving end of plays is an example of why he's such an effective player and why he would succeed on any team in the NBA. And I want to go back to what I said earlier about the Paul George comparisons, because the fact of the matter is that they're very different players. When you look at how they're used, Paul George's usage percentage is much more resembled that of a guard, whereas Kawhi Leonard is much more evenly distributed like you'd see a typical small forward. Paul George is much more of a pick and roll player, whereas Kawhi works better off the ball. That's all I got for you today, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something about Kawhi Leonard or about the Spurs. Thanks for watching. Again, leave me a comment if you want to see something like this again in the future.